All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a true summer staple today, but we're going way past the backyard barbecue. Beneath that thick green rind is this absolutely incredible story of genetic mathematics, really intricate horticulture, and, believe it or not, a massive paradox about the future of global agriculture. We're talking about the watermelon, not just as a snack, but as a total botanical marvel.
But before we get into the heavy science, let's start with a kind of tricky question. What actually is a watermelon? I mean, we call it a melon. It is literally right there in the name, right? But its true botanical classification is a whole different ballgame.
Botanically speaking, it's actually a berry. Yeah, no kidding. Specifically, it falls under a classification called a pepo, which is just a fancy way of saying a berry with a hard, thick rind. So technically, you're eating a giant berry. Although, fun fact, if you happen to live in Oklahoma, they have a completely different take. They actually went ahead and made the watermelon their official state vegetable.
Okay, moving into part one, the berry we call melon. So a lot of people just assume that seedless watermelons are GMOs, but they're absolutely not. They are sterile hybrids, and they were created by a really elegant piece of mathematical crossing developed way back in 1939 by a Japanese scientist, Professor H. Kihara. Here's how it works. You take male pollen from a watermelon with 22 chromosomes, and you cross it with a female flower that's been altered to have 44 chromosomes. The result? A fruit with exactly 33 chromosomes. And because 33 is an odd number, the fruit is totally sterile. It physically cannot produce those hard black seeds. It's basically the botanical equivalent of a mule.
And man, when these things grow, they can reach just absolute extremes. Take the Carolina cross variety. It was developed back in 1961 by a farmer in South Carolina, and this specific oblong melon can tip the scales at an astonishing 200 pounds. 200 pounds! It's that absolute heavyweight champion you're always seeing at the local state fairs.
But size is just one piece of the puzzle. There are over 1,200 varieties of watermelon grown worldwide, and the sheer diversity is wild. You've got the cream of Saskatchewan, which, despite the very Canadian name, actually originated in Russia, and it has this pale, creamy yellow flesh that tastes just like honey. Then there's the incredibly cool Moon and Stars variety, named because its dark green rind is completely speckled with these tiny yellow dots and usually one big yellow moon. Or if you want something small, check out the Golden Midget. It weighs just 3 to 5 pounds and has this intensely vibrant golden yellow rind. And of course, the Sugar Baby, developed in the 1950s as the perfect, compact little icebox melon to just slot right into your fridge.
So you can see this is a massively significant crop globally. Today, they're grown in almost 100 different countries. To put the scale of this into perspective, China alone is the world's leading producer, growing a staggering 79 million tons of watermelon every single year. The global demand for this giant berry is just off the charts.
Let's head over to part two, Secrets of the Patch.
Now, growing these massive fruits is definitely no walk in the park. Watermelon plants are monoecious. That's just a fancy botanical term meaning they produce completely separate male and female flowers, but on the exact same plant. Because of this setup, they can't self-pollinate. They rely 100% on bee visits to physically move the pollen from the male flower over to the female flower. And here's the real kicker. Each female flower is only open and receptive to being pollinated for exactly one single day. One day. If the weather's bad or if the bees just aren't out and about on that specific day, well, no fruit is going to set.
Now, if pollination is a success and the fruit actually grows, knowing exactly when to harvest it is a whole science of its own. You really want to look for 3 very specific visual cues. First, you check the belly, the part where the melon actually rests on the soil. It should turn from kind of a greenish-white color into a rich, buttery yellow. Second, the rind on the top should lose its slick, shiny look and get noticeably duller. And third, look for that little curly tendril on the vine right next to the melon. Farmers often call it the pig's tail. When that little tail turns brown and dries up, it is a fantastic sign your melon is fully ripe and ready to go. And hey, notice I didn't say anything about thumping it. You know, people absolutely love to knock and thump their melons at the grocery store. But agriculture experts actually warn us that this is super unreliable. Now, technically speaking, an immature melon will produce a high-pitched, sort of metallic ring, while a ripe one gives off a hollow or dull thud. The problem is, it's incredibly difficult for the average human ear to actually differentiate between those two sounds. So scratch the thumping. You are way better off just trusting your eyes and hunting for that buttery yellow belly.
Ultimately, the real secret to their survival, and just their incredible growth in general, is their absolute love for heat. I mean, they demand warm soils of at least 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit just to even be planted. Because they originally hail from tropical Africa, they've evolved these super deep root systems that allow them to uniquely tolerate drought and really arid conditions. Now, obviously, they still need consistent water to pump up a giant, juicy fruit, but their baseline tolerance for dry, baking heat is pretty remarkable.
Which brings us to part 3, the climate change paradox.
There's some fascinating data from a really dense, highly detailed climate modeling study out of Turkey, which, by the way, ranks in the top tier globally for vegetable production. And it reveals this stark contrast. Researchers ran models to estimate how suitable agricultural land is going to shift by the 2050s, looking at both medium and high emission scenarios. As global temperatures rise, standard staples like tomatoes and cucumbers actually lose massive chunks of suitable growing land. Tomatoes alone could see up to a 16% drop in viable area. But then you look at the data for watermelons, and their suitability literally explodes. We're talking an increase of up to 35%.
It brilliantly illustrates the massive geographical shift we're heading toward. You can practically see the prime, highly suitable zones for crops like tomatoes visibly receding. They're just shifting rapidly away from southern latitudes as those areas simply become way too hot. But for watermelons, the prime zones are becoming so much richer, expanding and becoming viable across vast new areas of land. What was considered marginal land for watermelons a few decades ago, that suddenly becomes prime real estate. And the reason for this huge divergence is pretty simple, but it is deeply impactful. See, every single crop has a thermal limit. Vegetables like tomatoes, cucumbers, onions, they get pushed way past their optimum temperatures as the climate warms. That reduces their photosynthesis rates and causes major plant stress. But because watermelons naturally evolved to tolerate and honestly to even demand intense heat, they're uniquely positioned as a true climate survivor. They absolutely thrive in the exact new warmer agricultural realities that are going to devastate a lot of other standard crops.
So I'm going to leave you with this thought to mull over. We usually just think of the watermelon as, a fun, sweet treat for a hot summer day. But as global temperatures keep rising and as our agricultural maps are fundamentally redrawn, could this ultra-resilient, heat-loving berry become a critical cornerstone of our future agricultural survival? It is entirely possible that the watermelon won't just be the star of your summer picnic, but a really key player in how we actually feed a warming world.